Good morning, everyone. This is Robert Hubbell from today's edition newsletter. Thank you for joining me on December 27th, 2025, for a relatively low-key wrap-up of the year. And if you're a regular here, I want to thank you for showing up every weekend. I will say we kind of stumbled into this format on the weekends, as we have done with almost everything in the newsletter, but it has become a really important part of the newsletter to me because I get to interact with readers it, in this fashion at least once a week. So thank you for joining us. So I want to reflect a little bit on where we are today versus where we were a year ago. Obviously, Trump had not been inaugurated a year ago today, but it was pretty clear the direction things were heading. And I would say people were freaking out, to use a technical term. Um, uh, People were in a panic, and we didn't know what was going to happen. I don't think we had an understanding of how bad it was going to get and just how lawless Trump would be. He exceeded expectations. I mean, people talk about Project 2025. He left that in the dust in the first 3 or 4 months. He just simply stopped following the Constitution, particularly Article 1, by minimizing the role of Congress. And it was a shock to the system. And it was also a shock that our representatives in Congress were really caught flat-footed. And I think it was a disappointment and frightening to many people that it seemed like no one was standing up to Trump. We saw law firms and universities and media companies begin to obey in advance, to use the term from Timothy Snyder. But as you know, if you read the newsletter, I'm feeling much better about where we are today for many reasons. And I was talking with Jill about this as we were coming back from the airport. And there are, I think, a couple of major developments that are kind of flying beneath the radar, but have really reshaped where we are today. So I just want to talk about a few of those. And the first is something that happened just before Christmas, which was the Supreme Court's decision that Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago was unlawful. And that was a 6-3 vote in the Supreme Court. And while that particular holding was welcome to the people in Chicago and Illinois, there seemed to be a shift in the Supreme Court. Two members of the radical reactionary majority switched sides. And the rationale that they used, I think, was less important than the fact that they said to Trump, we're not going to buy these crazy arguments you are making anymore. There were 3 people on the Supreme Court who were willing to accept those arguments, which essentially were nonsensical, non-English interpretations of the particular statute that was at issue. So to me, the most important part of it was that the court said, no, we're not going to accept these nonsense arguments. And to the extent that the court talked about, since this was on the shadow docket, what would happen in the future, the court suggested that Trump was going to have a very difficult time indeed meeting the bar for deploying National Guard troops across America. And that's very significant, I think, both because of the sort of tipping point on the Supreme Court, a minor one maybe, but one nonetheless. But Trump has been threatening the use of the military in American cities since before he took office. And reading tea leaves, the Supreme Court is not going to let that happen. And that is a major victory. I mean, even Gorsuch, who was in dissent, and Alito, who was really in dissent, said, it's just not part of the American tradition to have the military engage in law enforcement, even though they would have granted the administration the relief it was seeking. So there's a great skepticism among at least 8 members of the court about the ability to use the military. So a year in, it took us a year to get to that ruling, but it's significant. And I think we should all, I don't think we can let our guard down, but it could have turned out a lot worse, and it didn't. And so kudos to all of the law firms and amicus curiae who briefed that issue. In fact, I won't get into a lot of this, but there are these legal groups who submit sort of volunteer briefs, and one of those volunteer briefs really shaped the outcome of this argument. So for all of you lawyers out there who are donating your time or doing it on a paid basis, but as part of your vocation, God bless you, because that was a major victory. The second major development, I think, in the Supreme Court, it was the oral argument on tariffs. It seems pretty clear that the court is going to hold that these global reciprocal tariffs by Trump under the Economic Emergency Powers Act will be held to be unconstitutional. As a specific ruling, that's great. I mean, it's good again. But again, more important was the skepticism among the reactionary majority. Neil Gorsuch said, if we do this, there's no going back. We're never going to get this power back from the president to Congress. And one of the insidious pieces of the argument that the Trump administration was making was not only do we get to make these judgments about emergencies, but those are unreviewable. And Gorsuch said, no. If we say that you get to make these emergency declarations and it's unreviewable, you're above the law. So it was satisfying, gratifying to see that, again, reactionary members of the court seem to say Trump has gone too far. These arguments are too extreme. And saying that he cannot impose tariffs essentially takes his ability away to independently raise funds without regard to Congress, because he also claims the authority to spend those funds, those tariffs, without going through Congress. So we should expect a decision sometime soon declaring that all of the reciprocal tariffs that Trump imposed from May forward are unconstitutional. And I think it's someone post the number, please, in the comments. It's maybe $300 billion. That may be off by an order of magnitude. Trump continues to claim that he's collected $1 trillion or $2 trillion or $3 trillion. It is nowhere near that. But all of that money will have to be repaid to the companies, the U.S. domestic companies that paid it on import. How that money gets back to the consumers, since the consumers effectively paid for that, is another question. I think another very significant development that we should take heart from 1 year in is the fact that Trump has weaponized the DOJ and he's going after his enemies without any artifice. He's just telling Pam Bondi, indict people now. What do I have to do to get you to do it? And what we're finding out is that the courts and grand juries are refusing to put up with this. So the indictments against James Comey and Letitia James were not only dismissed, but then a grand jury has now 3 times refused to re-indict Letitia James. And it's not just the same grand jury. There are at least 2 different grand juries, and for all I know, there may be 3. They keep trying to move the case around so they can get it to a different grand jury. So grand jurors are seeing the rot, they're seeing the corruption, and they're refusing to go along with this. And the courts are also standing up against this in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, who was the person who was deported to El Salvador, the Venezuelan who was deported to El Salvador mistakenly. He has raised vindictive prosecution as a legal defense, in his case that was set for trial. And last week, the judge said, no, 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 I'm going to take the trial off calendar because I want to have an evidentiary hearing on the vindictive prosecution claim, which is just a clear signal that the judge is thinking very seriously about dismissing the case against Kilmar Abrego Garcia before it ever gets to trial. And I won't get into the weeds, but he's arranged the order of arguments so that the first thing that happens is that the government loses before Abrego Garcia is really put to the test on his claim. So again, I think we need to step back and recognize that Trump was threatening to go after his enemies, and people were rightfully panicked. And he's just run into judges and grand juries. And if any of these things ever get to a real jury, a trial jury, there aren't going to be convictions. And so I think we should take great comfort and solace from the fact that the courts have held. I do. And so those are three very major things that have happened. The other thing that I feel grateful for, and you're part of it and I'm part of it, is that as the mainstream media has collapsed and been purchased by these tech bros who are cozying up to Trump's, there has been this flowering of pro-democracy media and sources. And thank God that happened, because we all now have other channels to communicate. Blue Sky, Substack, Ghost, just independent YouTube channels where pro-democracy voices are saying, if the Washington Post isn't going to do it, if the New York Times is going to have these anodyne headlines, which they do some of the times and then other times they don't, well, then citizens will step up and they will speak out, and they will replace to some extent the media that has failed us. But what has also happened is that people like Jennifer Rubin and Paul Krugman and others who've been part of the mainstream media have come over and landed at these pro-democracy platforms. I'm going to talk about this in the next week or two because I think it's an important topic that needs to be addressed, because we should not take for granted that what we have built over the last year or two or four will be able to withstand some onslaught from the tech bros. But I'm not going anywhere. I know that there are a lot of other people who are not. And I just think that we're fortunate that at this moment in history, as the press has kind of receded into the background, that other voices have picked up the baton and continue to run with it. And then finally, I wouldn't be worth my salt if I didn't say the grassroots movement has saved democracy again. We are here today because tens of millions of Americans protested and, more importantly, voted when it mattered. And it would be impossible to understate the degree to which the grassroots movement and these special elections victories have stopped the forward momentum of Trump and the MAGA movement. So for all of you who are doing anything, and I mean anything, republishing pro-democracy posts on Facebook or on Blue Sky or on X, wherever you are, Instagram, if you're writing postcards, please keep doing it. For those of you, I published what I thought was a very poignant picture today from one of the visibility brigades. There was one woman. I don't think she was entirely alone. She was. It looked like it was 40 degrees below, and she was sitting out there with her flags and talking about defending democracy. And those of you who do that make an incredible impression on people who are driving by and honking, because they see that you haven't given up the faith, that you're not quitting. And if you aren't quitting, then they won't quit. So those are the things that I look at today and say, we're doing pretty good. It doesn't mean we're going to win. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to be guaranteed, but it does mean that a year in, we've outlasted them, we've bettered them, we've figured out the things that work. And frankly, I can tell you from the emails that I'm getting, people are just itching to get back out there in 2026. The most common email I'm getting right now is, when is the next No Kings Day? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that Indivisible is working on it. And shout out to Indivisible. I mean, they really have become the leaders in a broad coalition of grassroots movements, and we're very lucky that they have been able to capture the sentiment of the grassroots and to organize us. So I'm going to ask Jill to come in with any questions. I'll take maybe two or three um, questions. And I will note, I just saw the Boroughs People Resistance Band and Choir was out on Main Street last Saturday at 15 degrees. I posted pictures of the Brattleboro People's Resistance Band. So, just keep it up. So, so does AI edit my videos? No. What I don't know actually what happens. I will describe the process to you. I do the video. Um, there's this prologue on the videos when people are logging on. I like to give people a chance to log on. And when I started doing it, Substack just started lopping off that 2 or 3 or 4 minutes of vamping. I don't know whether it's a person or an AI agent. I just assume it's an AI agent because I can't imagine that someone from Substack is watching this. But what an AI bot does do, and again, I have no control over this, is about 20 seconds after I'm done, I get little snippets of these videos that are, little logical pieces of what I'm saying. And what they want me to do, which I don't do, shame on me, is to post it in notes, post it to Blue Sky, post it to um, YouTube. Now, many other Substackers are very good at that. And I have fallen down on the job. And my New Year's resolution is to begin to try to spread the word of the newsletter using the tools that Substack makes available to me. And frankly, I'll give you a preview of what I'm going to write about. Substack is changing. It was in the early days um, really pro-democracy, single author writers. Heather Cox Richardson is the paradigm. She's why I'm on Substack. But there are others: Jay Quo, Jessica Craven, Jess Piper. But as authors and reporters and journalists and influencers have left mainstream media or TikTok or YouTube and they've come to Substack, they're starting to change it a little bit because they're much more focused on video format. And, I write a newsletter that's a long form newsletter that invites people to think about what's happening. And that's what I'll continue to do. But I'm in an environment that is changing. And I've begun to believe that it's probably irresponsible of me to say, oh, well, everybody else on Substack can change with the times or, do sorts of things that, Substack helps to expand and modify what they're doing. And I just have made a conscious decision not to do that. In fact, well, when I first came onto Substack, they offered me that help, and I said no. I'm not interested. I'm not focused on gaining more subscribers. I just want to talk to the people who are interested in hearing what I have to say. But as more and more people come on Substack, it's just becoming negligent of me not to be more proactive in doing it. I never use AI to write anything in what I write to you. Those are my words and my words only. Um, I do use AI for one very specific purpose, and that is to find original source documents. So, as you know, I like to cite to statutes and to Department of Defense manuals and the Rome Statute and those sorts of things. And frankly, the AI agents are better at getting to original source documents than Google. So I do use it for that, but I always check whenever I find a source. I say, find the Department of Defense manual on XYZ. Um, I read the manual. I find the section in the manual. So I use AI in that way, but I never ever use AI to write a single word of what I deliver to you. What about remembrances on January 6th? Have readers post comments in the newsletter? That's an excellent idea. I haven't thought that far ahead. We're just sort of unwinding from a very full Christmas with our family. I was out before this live stream taking down Christmas decorations in the front yard. So when I have a moment or two of reflection this weekend, I will think about that. That's a very good suggestion. When is the tariff ruling coming? Now, technically, they have until June 30th of 2026. I think the court knows that the longer they wait, the worse it will be when they tell Trump that the tariffs are illegal. So I would expect that it would be coming sooner rather than later. And the other thing is that, or the other indication is that the oral argument on the tariffs was advanced. So the court has exhibited, some indication that time is of the essence here. But they can act very quickly when they want to, see the shadow docket. And yet, here we're now, I think, 2 months after the oral argument on the tariffs issue. Yes. So someone says, do we know which amicus curiae briefs contributed to the SCOTUS decision, and can you include it in the newsletter? I will do that. But the Supreme Court, I'll just tell you what happened. There's this particular statute. I think it's 10 USC 12406. If I got it wrong, all the numbers are in there somewhere. That's the statute that Trump was using to justify the deployment of troops in Chicago, and that statute used the words when the president cannot execute the laws using regular forces, then XYZ. And everyone had assumed using regular forces meant the police, the local sheriff. And someone filed an amicus brief that said, no, using the regular forces is a reference to the military, not to the National Guard, to the people who can be called up from the states, but to enlisted regular forces of the U.S. Army. And the Supreme Court got that brief, and it told everyone to brief that question, another round of briefing. And in the order, the shadow docket order by the Supreme Court, the 6 justices who said that Trump could not deploy troops to Chicago said, well, one of the reasons is because without the use of regular forces is a reference to the army, to the regular army. And Trump would have to show that the regular army could not keep order in Chicago. Oh, and before he could do that, he would have to prove that the regular army, the regular forces, had the legal authority to enforce the law in Chicago, which it does not because of the Posse Comitatus Act. And that's why I say that this shadow document decision, which was very focused on, a preliminary injunction, bodes very well for the future decisions by this court, because what it is saying is that the bar for deployment of the National Guard is that the regular military can't keep order in Chicago. Trump will never be able to prove that. And here's the point. That argument was raised by someone who filed an amicus brief. I believe it was an individual who was writing on his own. So I will write about this in the newsletter. Okay, I've got just one more question. What is your take on the jury conviction of Judge Dugan? So you will remember that there was a judge in state court who had a defendant coming into her courtroom. She saw ICE agents enter the courthouse and wait outside of the doors of her courtroom to apprehend this defendant in this criminal case. And she, I think, personally showed the defendant out of the courtroom, through the jury room, and then through a separate entrance or exit that jurors have in this courtroom. And so she was indicted on 2 counts. One was a felony obstruction of justice, and the other was a misdemeanor concealment, I believe. And there was a jury trial, and the jury convicted her of obstruction of justice, but not of concealment of a person who's fleeing justice. I have not studied this case closely, but first of all, it was a jury trial. So I think we need to be careful about impeaching or denigrating the role of the jury. They heard the evidence, they understood what the burden of proof was, they found her guilty of 1 count. I have thought about this since last week because I think Robin's Nest asked about it on last week's live stream, but I haven't researched it. But here's my off-the-cuff reaction. This is an example of something that's known as an inconsistent verdict. And what that means is that the split verdict, the acquittal on concealment, but the conviction on obstruction of justice, doesn't make sense. And it indicates that the jury misunderstood the law and issued a verdict that is just so internally inconsistent that the whole thing needs to be set aside. Because if there was obstruction of justice, it was concealment, of which she was acquitted. Now, again, this is just me thinking about it. I haven't seen any of the briefings. I haven't read any of it. I just haven't had the time to do it. But I will think about that and write about it. I think someone asked, what about there is a founding members meeting. I think it's for New Year's Eve. I will communicate separately with founding members. And then finally, last question, I'll go. What is my thought about release of volume 2 of Jack Smith's report? So Judge Aileen Cannon has been sitting on the release of that report, which is volume 2 relates to the concealment of the documents, the national security case. And in the normal course, reports by special counsel are released. Jack Smith's volume 2 has not yet been released, initially because, she was saying, well, there are other people who might be subject to criminal investigation or prosecution, which was true, but Trump pardoned them all. So there's nobody who could be prejudiced by the release of volume 2 at this point. And so I think Judge Aileen Cannon is simply auditioning for the Supreme Court by sitting on a report that should, by its terms and under the Special Counsel Act, have been released a long time ago. And apparently, when Jack Smith testified before the House Oversight Committee, he said that he had proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump intentionally concealed those documents, knowing that what he was doing was illegal. And I think that is why Aileen Cannon is sitting on that. Now, the problem is that Justice Roberts gave Trump a get out of jail free card in Trump versus U.S. and the criminal immunity decision. But I believe, that there will be pressure as the year goes on because of the House Oversight Committee hearing, which will reflect back on the indictments of Trump. So it should be released. Judge Cannon is acting in a lawless and partisan manner to advance her own personal interests. That's what I think about that. Okay. Um, can judges be removed from the Supreme Court? Yes, they can. They can be impeached. So can federal district court judges. If we ever are in a position to do so, we should impeach Judge Aileen Cannon and convict her and remove her from the bench. Just ask Judge Alcee Hastings, I think, was the last federal court judge to be impeached and convicted. Okay. Um, So, good point. Eric Lindobe says, but he wasn't president when he concealed the documents and obstructed justice. Why would the immunity ruling apply? It's a very good question. I think that Jack Smith dismissed the case against him because Trump was elected, and the Justice Department policy is that a sitting president cannot be indicted, and if a sitting president cannot be indicted, then he can't be subject to a criminal prosecution. Stupidest DOJ policy in existence. In any event, I need to sign off now. We have errands to run, but thank you for joining me. God bless you all. I hope you have, a happy new year. We are in a strong position going into 2026 because of you. So keep up the good work. Take care, everyone. Bye.